The Cannabis Heals Me podcast, episode 89.
You're listening to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast, where we explore the real stories of real people who have discovered the profound healing properties of the cannabis plant in their own lives. Find more at cannabishealsme.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. Did you miss me? Because I missed you guys. It seems crazy that it's been over a month now since the last episode went out. It is really hard trying to get people scheduled between Thanksgiving and New Year's. People's lives are busy, and I totally understand that. And then, even leading up to Thanksgiving, it was hard to get people scheduled. So I apologize for abandoning you for a month, but in a podcast like this where you're dependent on people's interviews, it's kind of hard to have an episode without an interviewee. But we are back and should be able to get back in the routine of having a healing story posted every single Monday. Have you made any New Year's resolutions yet? Well, if you haven't, I have one for you that's going to be super easy. Go out and click the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. And while you're subscribing, yet another New Year's resolution that you can write down and then check off your list and get that rush of endorphins that you feel when you check something off your list is give us a rating or review. Even though we took a long break for December, if you're liking the content that we're putting out, go ahead and give us a rating or a review on the podcast app that you use. That helps us. That gives us a boost in the juices, and your podcast app will recommend us to other people who are listening to similar type content. So that's an easy, free way for us to get the word out about the podcast. So go out right now. While you're listening, you can multitask. I'm sure you can. Almost everybody nowadays does multitask. So while you're listening, go out, subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating or review. If you give us a review, I'm going to read it on the air. We'd really appreciate it. One more quick announcement before I introduce today's guest. This coming Thursday, the Texans for Responsible Marijuana Policy is actually going to be coming to little old Lufkin and putting on an advocacy workshop. They're going to tell you more about how to get involved with advocacy in the state of Texas. Now, this is a completely and totally free event, but they do recommend that you register now to secure a spot because seating is limited. They've reserved a room and there's only so many chairs in that room. So if you want your hiney to be in one of those chairs, you need to go out and register. I will put a link. Actually, here's a short link that I'm going to use. cannabishealsme.com/Lufkin. If you go out to cannabishealsme.com/Lufkin, that will take you directly to the page that you need to go to in order to get registered for this event. I would love to see every single seat in that event filled out. Now, if you don't live in Lufkin or Lufkin's not within driving distance, they're making several stops within the state of Texas. If you go out to txmjpolicy.org, you'll be able to find a list of all the places they're going to be going in the state of Texas. So make sure you get out to one of those events. I'd love to see you in Lufkin, but if you live in the DFW or Houston area and can't make it to Lufkin, make sure you get out to one of these other events. txmjpolicy.org. I will also put a link directly to these events and where they're going to be on the show notes for today's episode. Now on to our guest. Our guest today is Lesli Downs. Lesli suffered from headaches from very early childhood, like when she was 8, and they just progressively got worse as she got older. Well, that wound up with her being on a litany of prescription medications, narcotics, muscle relaxers, you name it, she was on it. And she finally realized something's got to change. And she gave cannabis a try. So she's coming on to share her story today. Lesli, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are officially our first guest of 2020.
Oh, well, that's awesome. That's a good way to start out a new year, I think.
I agree.
First guest.
I agree. I can't think of anything better than to talk to you as our first guest of the new year. So tell our listeners a little bit about you and kind of about your history, your background.
Well, gosh, I don't know where to begin. I was raised in a small town, have a pretty simple story. It's not uncommon from a lot of people's story out there. Went through a period of having really bad headaches, went through the doctors, did the medicine, and it just progressively over the years got worse. And I had to figure out another way to get my health back and to figure something else out because what I was doing wasn't working. And I don't even think at the time I realized how bad it had gotten until I look back now and I see, oh, wow, that was a little worse than I thought it was at the time I was going through it. So it's like I said, my story is not uncommon from a lot of people out there suffering from many, many illnesses. But by the time it was all said and done, I was on maybe 13 different medications in a day. I had
Wow.
so many diagnoses that none of them made sense, but there was, I mean, we were just grasping for straws, and that's what the doctors were doing. My headache started when I was around 8 years old. And about that time, my vision was changing. And in my family, a lot of us have really bad eyesight. So they blamed it on my eyesight changing, as your eyesight's progressively changing as you're growing. But they never were too incredibly bad until high school. Well, by then, my vision was perfect. I mean, it had not changed in years. I was pretty much the same. So at that point, we knew that it couldn't be that. And that's when people kind of were becoming aware of migraines. The migraine was becoming very aware. Women suffer, it wasn't real well known. We were still having a lot of studies. This was back in the 90s, would have been around, 93, 96, and those areas where medicine was just kind of starting to come out to help migraines. And I was diagnosed with them in high school after having an episode of being very sick one day and blacking out in the girls' bathroom. And my Spanish teacher came to find me. She was concerned because I hadn't made it back to class.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, my mom knew this was a lot more than just a headache from vision. And she took me to a doctor she worked for that typically didn't see anybody under the age of 18, but that my mom had worked for him for years. And I was actually their babysitter. So they knew me. And that's when he diagnosed me with migraines. And when the first treatment I think that I ever had for a migraine began, I had my first Demerol shot. I had no idea what it was at the time. Knocked me out for like 3 days.
Oh, wow.
Headache. So that kind of became my routine. If I got a bad headache, my mom would take me to the doctor. They'd give me Demerol. And that's kind of where it began. You don't realize it at the time. And then I think as I grew, your hormones changed. You go through stresses of becoming a teenager and a young adult. And, my headaches got worse. And of course, more medicine was added. And they were trying everything they could at that time from, antidepressants to high blood pressure to anything that they think that would contribute to a headache, they would try it. And I think I tried just about everything that you possibly could for migraines. But what I didn't realize at the time, the side effects from those drugs are what I suffered from. And when I was probably 20, that became very apparent to me, my doctors, and my family when I had had a headache that lasted 3-4 days. And the doctors were trying different medicines to try to get it to stop. I was throwing up. I couldn't even hardly get out of bed. I couldn't go to work. And so they rotated doing different medicines throughout these 3-4 days. It may have been over a week, actually. And by the end of that week, my body was so overloaded with the medicine that I slipped into a coma.
Oh, my goodness.
I was in the back room. I lived with my father and stepmother at the time. And I remember kind of coming to, and I couldn't yell. I couldn't move. The only thing I could do was try to grab something to throw at the door. And this part of the story, I don't remember very vividly. I just kind of remember grabbing a shoe or something. And it took a while for my stepmom and dad to realize what it was, because there were kids playing baseball out in the front yard. And they thought they were hearing, the bats hitting the balls and maybe the balls hitting things. My stepmom got up and looked out and saw they weren't practicing baseball anymore, but she could still hear that noise. So she called for my father, and they started to walk down the hall and realized my door was shut, and that was where it was coming from. She said when they went to push the door open, they couldn't get it open because whatever I had thrown kind of wedged under the door. But she said as soon as they pushed it open, they saw me on the floor, passed out. I wasn't responsive. So what we had figured out, they first thought it was an overdose. Maybe something they had given me, I took too much of it. So they gave me charcoal. I didn't come out of the coma. And so they began to realize that it was a mixture, I think, of all the different things I had taken over that week that started counteracting each other. And my body just shut down. That is the point that I started to see a pain management doctor. And it went on from there. And I think a lot of people know this story. When you start with pain management doctors, what they do all the injections and all the, nerve, all the things that they do to help your pain. And when that doesn't work, then we go to pain medicine. But even in the midst of all that, of the procedures and stuff, you still had pain medicine. I would still get my Demerol shots. And I found I liked those Demerol shots when I would get them. At the time, I rationalized, well, this is medicine. It's coming from the doctor. It's okay if I like it. It's okay if I kind of like that feeling. It's supposed to be that way. And at the same time, I had just started working in pharmacy. So I was becoming aware of kind of what drugs were, kind of the severity, the different levels. I was just really becoming aware of kind of what I had been going through and what I've been taking. But I still rationalize. It's okay. It's from a doctor. So anyways, from then on, it just got worse and procedures didn't work. About 10 years ago, it finally was the point that I either was going to put in a spinal nerve stimulator to control, my headaches and the pain it was causing, a pain pump, or just get on medication and see what we could do. And that is when the narcotics started every day. And from that point, it was just a slow burn to my health, just going downward.
Yeah.
Even though there were times it felt good, the drugs did help. They gave me energy. They stopped the pain, but they always stopped by the end of the day. And I was always back to that same cycle of let's get the drugs back in. And eventually you took too much, and there were times I took way too much because my pain was so bad, or I thought my pain was so bad.
Let me rewind for just a second. How long were you in this coma from all these drugs that you took back then?
So the coma lasted for 8 hours. During the coma, what is amazing, what I found out through that is, when you say, can people hear me? Do they know what's going on? You are so aware of everything going around you. I could hear everything going around me. I could feel them. When I would have trouble breathing, my chest would feel very, very heavy. The nurse would they take your knuckles and rub on your sternum real hard to kind of shock you back because you feel that pain and you kind of pull back. And I would remember her doing it and it would hurt. Oh, it would hurt so bad. And I would sit there and say, stop, why are you doing that? But of course, she couldn't hear me. Nothing was coming out. I could hear the machines, the doctors, everything they were doing to me, but I could not move. I could not speak. I could not open my eyes.
Wow.
So 8 hours later, I finally just woke up. And at that point is when I threw up the charcoal. And I remember my doctor looking at me and he goes, okay, you didn't overdose. He goes, or you would have woke up within an hour, 30 minutes from giving that charcoal. Something else is going on. And like I said, that's when they started to figure out and look at all the different things they were trying. And they realized this had to be, she had to have a counteraction to all this, And even then, my body was screaming out, hey, we got to stop. We got to slow down. This is too much I was in my 20s and that was a lot of medication to try in your 20s, the difference. It really is a lot.
That's when they referred you to the pain management doctor. And then you started getting more and more narcotics added to your medication routine, right?
Yes, more and more drugs were being tried. Everything that came out that was new that could possibly help, we tried. They did all of the nerve ablations, the lidocaine injections. Gosh, there's so many things. And I did several of these procedures over the next, I would say over the next 8 years. I did several of those over and over and over. Because you would have a little bit of success. They'd say, well, let's take a break and let's try it again later. But with each procedure, it never got better. I never saw much success or even much more than I saw the first time.
Hey guys, wanted to tell you real quick about our podcast host and sponsor, Anchor.fm. If you're thinking about starting your own podcast, I highly recommend Anchor. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. They'll distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go out to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm. Now back to the show.
So once you get to a point where those procedures that they try with all the injections and things to stop the pain in your back or stop the nerves, what they would try to do is they said my occipital nerve, which runs in the back of your neck, would get inflamed, and that would cause my headaches. So they would go in and try to numb that nerve or kill that nerve or the different things that they tried to, I guess, rewire that nerve or just get it to stop signals out. But like I said, I never had, maybe more than 20 to 30% improvement with each of those, but it never seemed to last. It always seemed to just go back.
Yeah. So, they always ask on the pain scale. And so what would you say with the narcotics and everything, what would you say your pain scale would be on the narcotics on a daily basis?
I bet you anytime I would go into the doctor and fill the paperwork out and they would ask that question, I never registered below a 6 or 7 on a daily basis. That's what I felt that I was always at. If I ever got to a 4 or 5, it was a really good day.
Oh, wow.
It really was. And as it progressed and got worse, my pain got worse. And then, of course, all the other things I experienced got worse. But like I said, it took years of just that building up and building up. And
yeah. And so at one point you were on up to 13 medications per day. Was it different prescriptions or just 13 pills?
There was different prescriptions that I used for different things. So by the time I had gotten to the point I was going to decide to get to do cannabis, I was diagnosed once with lupus. Then they changed that to rheumatoid arthritis. Then they went to psoriatic arthritis. Then they went to, it is a form of some type of arthritis, but we're not sure. So this medicine seems to work. We're going to keep, putting you on it. So they had me on Demerol, which is an injection, to help the inflammation in your joints if you have a type of, arthritis disease. Then they had me on methotrexate. Methotrexate is also given to cancer patients. I had 2 different narcotics, actually 3 different narcotics: Oxycontin, oxycodone, Percocet, lidoderm patches, muscle relaxers, Topamax. And I know I'm not getting it all. That's only about 8, right? Gosh.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep, that's 8.
About 8. I'm missing some in there. Some of them were, like vitamin D, because everybody's low on vitamin D, and then your medicine doesn't work if your vitamin D is low because you can't absorb it, and some other things like that. I'll have to try to remember them all. But the main ones are the narcotics, and then adding that Demerol, and then adding so it was, by the time I got to that point, my symptoms weren't just pain. I couldn't even get out of bed.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you next. Well, what was your quality of life? If you're on all these narcotics, what was your quality of life?
So in the beginning, probably the first, I would say 7, 8 years of being on the narcotics. No, I'm giving that too much credit. I'm going to say about the first 6 years. So about half, 5 to 6 years, I was pretty functionable. I could go to work, but when I had a headache or I had an issue, I missed work. And I didn't just miss one day. I'd miss several days.
Wow.
It was always an issue. That was an issue as it went on for me, was me working and being sick. And, and I had bosses that could really see I was a good person. I was a hard worker, and they could see I was struggling with this. And they tried to work with me. And then I had bosses that they just didn't understand. And I don't blame either one of them for either way, because it's hard to work with a person that misses a lot of work, because then you have other people that have to be accounted for your work that you didn't,
Yeah.
So I understand where they're coming from. So I always struggled with that. And then it took a point where it started to turn once I got pregnant with my son. I had to wean myself down off some of my medicine. And that was hard. It was very hard. I had to completely stop almost all of that except for the narcotics and then start weaning myself off. And my pain management doctor kicked me right out the door. As soon as they found out I was pregnant, they said, well, we can't treat you anymore. You have to take yourself off all this, and we'll give you one more prescription, and then you're on your own. If you need help, call us.
Wow.
Well, luckily, I had been working in pharmacy for 15 years. So I was kind of aware of medicine. I kind of understood how it worked. I also had a background of always being involved in AA and Al Anon because we had a lot of people that suffered from drug addictions and alcohol addictions in my family and a lot of friends. So I was always aware of the side of drugs, but I always rationalized as this is medical. So, it's okay. And I always tried to give the doctors a lot of credit. Does that make sense on what they would say about the medicine that wasn't true? Even though I was learning in pharmacy, there were things doctors didn't know about medicine because they messed up all the time.
Yeah.
When they would call in prescriptions and we would have to call and correct them, or we'd have to flag something. So I understood that, but it was still very hard to be kicked out to do that all by yourself. And it was stressful. And I went through some very, very hard month of trying to figure out, and I didn't have an OB at the time. I was trying to find one. And it seemed like every door that I thought an OB, somebody would give me a recommendation, they couldn't get me in until after I was way out of medication.
Oh, wow.
And that, that was a fear. I can't be without this medicine. How am I going to do this? And I finally did find one, and we kind of learned together. He had never had a patient like me that was on medication like this. And he kind of kept me humble through some of it. He would lecture me. He would, well, you need to get off this dose. I really need you at this dose. And he kind of pushed me, to lower myself and to get to where I needed to go at a dose we both felt comfortable. So I would get down to a low enough dose of Oxycontin. Is pretty much the only thing I finally took through my pregnancy. I got off the Oxycontin, and I got on the oxycodone, excuse me. And I would kind of, juggle my dose based on how I felt that day. And he kind of worked with me, but he did push me to get as low as I possibly could to tolerate. But once I had my son, the gate of hells came open. It was, my body went into complete turmoil. It couldn't do that dose anymore. And trying to get back up to the dose I was before was a battle with my doctor because they didn't want to listen to me. I hadn't seen them for 9 months. And I went back to them because they were the only doctor I knew. I already had an established relationship with them. I knew I could go do this again with another doctor. So it was a battle getting back to a dose that I felt I could function. And I really don't think I ever got to a functionable dose. I did have good periods where I did keep another job for a period of time, but then I lost it and then I didn't have a job. So that is the point I went way downhill, is when I lost my second job.
Yeah.
And it was because of sickness. I mean, that's mostly what it was. And there was other things too that weren't my fault. But a lot of it was to do with my illness and my sickness and the fact that accountability on my part wasn't there. And it was hard for some employers. So I was very depressed too at that time. I had just had my son and my body was just in turmoil and it never really recovered. From that point on, I got to the point that I was having to go to doctors to try to figure out what was going on, from a thyroid doctor to the rheumatologist. And it finally ended at the rheumatologist with the Demerol and the methotrexate and trying all the different things, trying to figure out what I had and what the diagnosis was. By the time I got to that point, my mother-in-law was having to come and help me. She lived in Texas, and having to come to Oklahoma to help me with my son, because there were days I couldn't get out of bed. There were days I would walk down the hall and pass out. My vision was consistently blurry, whiting out. I couldn't even drive long distances in town because I would think that my vision would white out and all of a sudden I would pass out.
Yeah.
And I would try to talk to the doctor about these. I was like, I really think these are side effects. And they were like, no, these aren't side effects. No. We think it's something else. We need to run more tests. We need to add more medicine. And I'm like, no, I just really feel like these are side effects from the medicine. And they would never listen to me. finally, one day I was standing at the top of the stairs talking to my son. I believe he was 3 at the time. And I fell down the stairs.
Oh
I
my
blacked out
goodness.
and fell completely. And luckily, he was old enough that I could say, okay, can you go get my phone so mommy can call daddy? And I came, was kind of coming through and he was like, mommy fell, daddy. And it
Yeah.
broke my heart because I did not want my son to see that again, him to see that side of me. So it was getting bad enough that I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't function. I was not a mom. I was not a wife. I definitely was not a daughter or a daughter-in-law. But my mother-in-law wouldn't have been able to come and help. I don't know where we would be.
Yeah.
I really, really don't. But it was pretty bad. And at the time, it didn't seem bad to me. It seemed normal. I was always in bed. I was always just laying there, try to be quiet. Don't make too much noise. Mommy doesn't feel good. Leave mommy alone. Shut the door. So it was pretty normal. Now looking back, wow, I never realized passing out. And that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It really is.
So when did you decide to try because you said you're from a small town. I can only imagine what your attitude toward cannabis was.
Oh, and I mentioned that earlier about having the drug and alcohol in my background.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this was something, no, I was not going to do. Cannabis was the gateway drug. You didn't do that. No, everybody started with pot. Don't smoke it. Don't do it. And I was serious about not doing drugs, and I drank a little. Everybody kind of experimented. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people in high school, you kind of experimented. But the one thing was drugs were a no-no for me.
Yeah.
So my husband had known someone that had tried it and it helped. And their story was similar to mine. They suffered from some of the similar things I did. And it amazed him. And he kind of started doing his own research. And he just kept, maybe, just maybe. And I'm like, no, this is illegal. No, we can't do this. No, this is, and I wouldn't listen to him. But as my symptoms got worse and my quality of life got worse, and I began to see that it was affecting my son and that he was very aware of how sick I was. And he was very articulate about it. He would speak to his grandma about, mommy doesn't feel good a lot of it, and she expressed that to me one day. And I realized something's got to change. Something has to change. So I started kind of talking to my husband about it. Really, okay, well, maybe I'll try it. Well, when we go to Colorado, maybe we'll get some and you'll try it. Well, I had no idea about any of it. So it was very frustrating at first. And I got very, very frustrated. And I said, no, I'm not going to do this. But I began to realize that, I did 10, 15 years of narcotics.
Mm-hmm.
I gave all these years to these doctors. Why can't I just try something different? I mean, is it really going to hurt me? So we just slowly, when we'd go to Colorado, we would get things, we would try things. I would research. I would ask people that I knew that were very familiar with it. And eventually I said, okay, when we go back to the doctor, if he says that I have to be on any more medication because this isn't working, I'm going to fully do this. And my husband said, okay. We went together. We sat in my rheumatologist's office. And once again, he would not listen to me. I said, I think it's the medicine. I do not think it's my eyesight. I do not think it's something else. No, no, no. So we have another medicine we want to add. And we think this will help this medicine work better. Me and my husband looked at each other. And I looked at the doctor and I said, I'm done. I said, no, thank you. I said, I'm not doing any more medicine. I'm done.
Yeah.
And we got up and we walked out. And that point on, I said, okay. And we were going to be going to Colorado pretty soon anyways. We had planned a trip. And from that point on, it was point of no return. I went in and I asked tons of questions. I found a dispensary that a friend had recommended that they said was a good one. I went in, I started asking questions. This is what I suffer from. They kind of got me on a path. And from there, I have not looked back. I have not looked back. Now it's just been learning, growing, figuring it out, helping others, help them to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Now, when was it that you first tried cannabis to see if it helped with your headaches?
It has been over 4 years ago now. Well, I say that. I mean, I tried like a gummy once, and it may have been 5 years ago that a friend gave me. And nothing really happened because I was still on all of my medication at the time. So, that was something I also had to realize is that I had to get off the medication to do this correctly because I
Yeah.
knew the medication was the problem. So it might have been 5 years. I tried a gummy or two, but it was about a year before it became legal here in Oklahoma, which was 2018. So 2017, 2016, that would have been the first time I went into a dispensary and actually bought something that they recommended and used it.
So, what was the process for you when you finally said, enough is enough? I know I've got to get off these meds in order for to give cannabis a fair shot. What
Mhm.
was that process like? Did you go cold turkey? Did you start weaning yourself off the meds? I mean, because like when you go to a pain management doctor, don't they do drug tests?
They do. They do. And I will say this. So the last visit I had was in September of 2016, my pain management doctor. At that point is when I had started cannabis. And I knew on my drug test it was going to show up. I knew. And I knew that if I was going to do this, that was my point of no return.
Yeah.
So I knew when I went in for September, it would show up. And when I would show up for my October appointment, they were done. So I had from September to October to figure this out. And I knew how to kind of wing myself off. I knew kind of how to do it. But I also knew from a little bit of research and what some of them had told me that cannabis helps with the withdrawal symptoms.
Hmm.
So it was really trial and error because I didn't know a whole lot and I was only going by what other people had told me or what they had experienced or what they recommended. So I remember a lot of the times when you're going through withdrawals, I had it felt like bugs were constantly crawling in my legs and in my arms, and I couldn't sit still and I couldn't sleep. And I would be so nervous and I would be fidgety and it would be all through the night.
Mm.
I remember kind of starting to experience that. So I didn't really know kind of how to smoke pot. I'd never really done it before. I had been around people that had smoked it in a pipe or rolled a joint. And so I got on YouTube and I'm like, what is the best way to do this? Because it was the middle of the night. I was having those bugs. I was very, anxious and I just wanted to sleep. And I looked up to take cigarettes and and I looked up of how to roll it just in a cigarette thing. And that was the first time I sat out and medicated and helped with my withdrawals was that night.
Yeah.
And I do remember it relaxing me. And I was able to go lay down and fall asleep. And I remember waking up thinking, wow, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
But I come to find out you had to figure out the dosing. And there were times I did a little too much and it gave me a headache, or it didn't do enough, or I didn't have enough, or I felt like I was doing way too much. And I think some of that guilt carried over from the drugs because when I was on narcotics, I didn't talk about it. It was still something you didn't discuss with people, even though it was the prescription.
Right.
You didn't discuss that you were on pain medicine. No, didn't talk about that. And so I never talked to people about what I took. And when I would take medicine and I would take too much, and I knew I always did, I had guilt. And if my husband said, did you take too much medicine? Because he could see it all over my face, 'cause I'm druggy and I'm slurring and no, I had that guilt. And I think that guilt carried over with the cannabis because I would think, oh, I'm doing too much. Oh gosh, and then he would also make comments. And finally, I learned through listening to podcasts like yours and other people and listening to their stories is it's all about figuring out what works for yourself. So, like I said, it was a battle, but if I didn't have cannabis, I wouldn't have gotten through the withdrawal. And there
Yeah.
were many, many nights of non-sleep. There were nights of throwing up, and it helped. Nausea, oh, intense nausea. At that point is when I realized I was an addict. I didn't really realize until I was taking my own self off this medicine and having to medicate myself to get through the symptoms that I really was addicted. It just never hit me until that point. I think I knew deep down, but until that point, no, I never realized this was another something else I had to deal with. I was an addict, something I swore I never would be, that I swore I would stay away from. And cannabis brought me out of that. Also helped me realize that I was an addict and I was coming out of that. So it helped with those withdrawal symptoms, you know?
What were your headaches like during this time, or were the other withdrawal symptoms far worse than the headaches?
Oh, the headaches were consistent. They never
Yeah.
stopped. Every day, the headache. Now, there were days it would get better, it would be more tolerable. And what I noticed over a period of time with my headaches is I would have them and they were tolerable, but I was still able to function.
Mm-hmm.
Before, oh, if I had a headache, I was in bed and it would be like for a week, days. And I started to notice, even though I had one, I was still able to function and do things. I could still kind of concentrate, get through it, push through the pain, and it wasn't so bad. And it got better and better and better. And I think I don't know if it was my body trying to get everything all processed out, all the medicine out of my system, kind of detoxing myself, my endocannabinoid system, maybe rebalancing, but it got a lot better, a lot more tolerable. And now I can predict my headaches. I know what's causing them. I know what helps them. I know, and there's different things that cause my headaches. I couldn't do that before.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can.
How long do you think it took you to kind of fully get off the narcotics and not still be suffering from the withdrawal symptoms? Or is that something you still struggle with?
Well, if we want to talk about all medicine, even after it took me a month to wean off all the narcotics and to go solely cannabis. But even at that point, I still used Advil and Tylenol consistently every day. And I did that for months and months. I want to say maybe even a year. And then I started to notice I didn't take it as often and I didn't use it as often. And now I don't do anything but cannabis. If
Wow.
I have to take a Benadryl or an Advil, it is very, very, very seldom and not very often. But I noticed that progression over, the first year. I still kind of grasped. And I don't know if that was my body or my mental capacity thinking I needed it. You know how some smokers say they can quit smoking, but it's having something in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just a mental thing that every day I took medicine and I just can't get past that, I got to take something, or if I really did need it to get to that point to where I could just do cannabis. That's something I'm still trying to figure out. But I think it's kind of cool how it was a slow progression and I didn't even realize it, that it happened. So I would say the actual withdrawal from the narcotics, it took a few months. I was off the narcotics in a month, but I still had that, the headaches, maybe the, aches and pains here and there, those kind of things.
Yeah. Now I know you said your husband is the one that actually recommended cannabis to you. What was the reaction kind of your more extended family when you kind of came out of the closet to them about your cannabis use?
Well, that was a very hard one because we are from Texas, from the South. So we are Bible believing, God fearing people. And I knew everybody in my family was going to point their fingers and judge me and say horrible things and say that, I just kept thinking this. So my husband and I had made the decision to not tell anybody for 3 to 4 months and let them see the difference in me. Let them see that actions speak louder than their words. And so for, I don't know, 3 months, we would go home and visit and people would be like, "Well, Lesli, what is changing? Something's going on." And I'd say, "Well, I'm trying to get off all my medicine." "Oh, okay." And then if they'd see me again, I'd say, "Well, I started CBD," in which I did all of these things I did do. I did start with CBD and I still do CBD, and it was, even though at the time I was already fully on cannabis. And then by the 3rd or 4th month, we decided we got to tell somebody. And I picked my Nana and we sat down and I told Kyle, I said, if she accepts this and can see it, then I know I'm okay, because this woman is my person. I'm very close to her. And she was thrilled. She was like,
Wow.
no, you're kidding. Well, baby, if it helps you, then I'm all for it. So
That's
from that
awesome.
point forward, it was a slow, and really it wasn't all at once. It was just a slow because people kept asking, what is going on? What are you doing? You're doing something. They just couldn't believe just getting off medicine and CBD. And even at that time, CBD in Texas was still a no-no.
Yes.
Not. No, it's just now, and it's hard. So as we told everybody, it was really kind of amazing how people kind of accepted it a little bit. But over the years, they've accepted it more and they're opening up to it more. My family's opening up to it a whole lot more. Starting the blog that I started and sharing my story, I think helped them to see that maybe this isn't a bad thing and it's a good thing.
Hmm.
But like I said, it was a big fear because, ooh, that was a no-no. No,
Right.
no.
Well, if you started this in 2016, well, cannabis wasn't legalized in Oklahoma until 2018. So for a couple of years, you were having to do this illegally.
I was.
And as Christians, we're raised that if it's illegal,
Mhm.
then it is a sin. So how did you, I mean, I'm sure that was probably a struggle for you.
It was. And I'm going to tell you right now, that was one of my main struggles in deciding to do it. Is I felt this conflict inside of me of this can't be right. I have been told my whole life this is wrong. And there was one night, and it was really the night before we were going to the rheumatologist to make the decision. And I do remember that was a hard day. Me and my husband fought. My son was difficult, and he probably wasn't difficult. I was just probably having a difficult day. So everything around me just seemed so difficult.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to take a bath. It was very late. And I remember sitting there going, God, I don't know what to do. I don't know if this is what you want, if this is what you don't want, but I've got to do something. And I remember just crying and crying. And I remember hearing inside of me, listen to me and just do this. I have you. And I went, all right, I'm going to do this, but man, I hope this is the right thing. I still doubted, and I still doubt sometimes to this day because going to church or talking to other Christians, it's hard because you don't know where that line is.
Hmm.
You don't know what they're going to say or how they're going to react. So you want to be cautious. So it was always a struggle for me. It was. But I finally gave in. And through this process, I started to see things that God did in my life that I didn't realize before. Not because of cannabis, but I think because He met me at a place in my life that I needed something to get me out of it. And He used cannabis as my stepping stone.
Right.
He knew in my mindset, I had to replace a drug for a drug. Not saying cannabis is a drug, but in my mindset, that's the way it was. I'm not going to get past this. And our minds are powerful. Man, they're powerful. And He knew I had to open up some way so He could move and I could heal. And then we could find a way through this. And I think that He used that as a stepping stone. It's taken me a while to realize that, but I do now. But I did struggle with it. It was a big struggle.
Well, you mentioned your blog a little while ago. So tell the listeners a little bit more about it and, like what the URL is and what you do over there on it.
Well, it was really just started to share my struggle, my whole story from the time my headache started to the point I decided to do cannabis and then why I decided to do it. My hope was really just, I knew I couldn't be the only one out there. And I knew I couldn't be the only one that this could help or that this touched, that somebody else had a story to share. And my whole purpose was just to really encourage people because we don't have the studies. We're having to rely on experience right at this moment. And the more stories and more experience and details we get out of people, the more we're going to learn. So that was really the whole purpose of the blog. It's called psychonologyconsultant.com. It's on WordPress. And psychonology is a combination of psychology and cannabis. And just the study of it's a word I created one day because I was thinking about how my mind has changed and how I see things differently now that I'm off all the medication,
Mm-hmm.
and how that cannabis as a stepping stone just kind of opened me up a little bit more to see things better, understand things more clear, concentrate more. And it just amazed me how it healed me and how it helped me. So I thought, well, this has to have, our minds are so powerful. We have to figure out the connection between it all. And at the time, I had no idea about the endocannabinoid system. I was still beginning my research.
Mm-hmm.
So then eventually I decided to connect that word about a year later to the blog. And yeah, that was kind of how that came about. And the blog was started.
Cool. Well, I'll make sure I put a link in today's show notes to your blog page. Any other resources that you recommend to folks that might be wanting to look into using cannabis to either wean off narcotics or to help with their headaches or migraines?
I think the resources we have, like your podcast, people's blogs, anything like Leafly, Weed Maps, all of them have stories and connections to stories to stuff like I experienced. And the way you're going to learn is by finding somebody that can help you through it, that can help guide you through it. And that was another intent for the blog. If anybody ever wanted to reach out and need help, I am more than willing. And I do. I talk to lots of people, every day about it that just have questions, that contact me through the blog or through my email. And I really do believe any site you can find that shares stories like yours, podcasts, reach out to them, because they're going to have people that have been through it and that can maybe help you, or know somebody that can help you. Contact me. I will help you try to find something. I think we have lots of people out here just trying to help, and we just have to use each other's resources and maybe, come together to help these people.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story today, Lesli. I think people will find it very informational and very moving. I think, like you said, you're like, well, it's something the doctor prescribes, so it must be totally okay.
Yeah.
But let's not use this plant that's been on the earth for ever.
Exactly. That's been used forever. Yes, I agree. And we've actually used it before in pharmacy before it became illegal.
Right.
So our pharmaceutical, that's what they used, was herbs and cannabis and things like that. So yeah, the government.
It is. And it's really sad that, because there are other people who felt like you did and still feel like you did. And we see them suffering and struggling, whereas they wouldn't necessarily have to if they could get past this this brainwashing that just because it's illegal, it's immoral or it's a sin.
Yes. And really just not relying on all the information that we've been told over the years. Maybe just open your horizons and say, well, let's just look and see what other information is out there. Because all the lies we've been told for many, many years are just not true, and then that doesn't help with the whole, moral thing and trying to make that decision on top of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Lesli, for coming on and sharing your story. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And I love that you're doing what you're doing. And that's the cool thing about people who have found cannabis. They don't just hide their light under a bushel.
Mm-hmm.
They go out and they say, oh my gosh, we've been lied to for 80 years.
Yeah.
Check it out, guys. Check it out. They're more than happy to share their story with people and then try to help other people with their story. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, I will put a link to your blog on the show notes for today's episode. And this episode will probably come out on Monday of next week. Cool. And we'll finally get back in the groove of doing our episodes every week.
Sounds awesome.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks a lot, Lesli.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, bye. Show notes for today's episode can be found out at cannabishealsme.com/89. We will be back this Thursday with an educational episode. I'm going to talk to Tyler Colford about cannabis in Vermont. So you guys tune in on Thursday to hear that episode. I hope to see you guys on Thursday in Lufkin at the Texas Marijuana Policy Regional Advocacy Workshop. Again, go out to cannabishealsme.com/Lufkin to get signed up for that. Have a great week, and we will talk to you guys on Thursday. Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode of the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever podcast app you're using. Do you have a suggestion for a guest on Cannabis Heals Me? Send an email to podcast@cannabishealsme.com. We'd love to hear from you. Please do not take any information from Cannabis Heals Me or its guests as medical advice. Contact your licensed physician before taking cannabis or using it for medical treatments.